the seams are sometimes how the brands actually cut costs in order to make the piece of clothing cheaper. Hi, I'm Veronica, and on this channel we discuss about what makes cloths and textiles work and what doesn't. And today we're breaking down seams, what they look like, how they're made, and why they can make or break a garment. When it comes to seams, there is one rule that defines everything. A seam has to behave like the fabric it's sewn into. If the fabric stretches, the seam should stretch as well. If the fabric is rigid, the seam must stay stable. And if they don't match, you get seams that snap, garments that twist, clothes that feel restrictive. And before we go into seams, we have to remember one important thing about the types of fabrics and materials that exist. There are two main types of materials: woven fabrics and knits. When it comes to woven fabrics, they are made by crossing threads over and under each other, like a grid. That structure makes them stable and not very stretchy. So they hold their shape, but they don't really move with your body. You can easily find them in shirts, denim, trousers, or dresses. And on the other hand, knit fabrics are made from loops. And those loops can expand and contract, which is why they're stretchy and flexible. The knit fabrics are mainly used in t-shirts, leggings, most fitted, comfortable dresses, and basically in everything that needs a little stretch. And here's the part most people don't realize. It's not just that they feel different, they also behave differently under stress. Woven fabrics resist movement, while knit fabrics absorb it. And because of that, the seam has to either hold everything in place or move with it. And that's why the same seam that works perfectly in a shirt can completely fail in a t-shirt. And now let's get into seams, types, how they look, and where they are used. The first type of seams, the straight stitch, or also known as lock stitch. This type of seam is mostly used for woven fabrics, and it looks like a clean, straight line of stitching. This seam is made by two threads locking together inside the fabric, and you'll mostly see it on side seams of shirts and trousers, waistbands, collars, and cuffs. This seam is used because it's very stable and precise, and it helps holding shape better. This exact property of being very stable is why it's mostly used in woven fabrics, because woven fabrics are very stable, and they need a stable seam as well. So if you ever see this seam on a stretchy fabric, that is actually a problem, because this seam cannot stretch and will eventually break when the knit fabric is going to expand. The zigzag stitch. This stitch is mostly used for woven materials, but sometimes also for knits, because it offers a little stretch as well. Like its name, it looks like a back and forth zigzag line, and you can easily understand when you see it on a piece of clothing. In order to obtain this stitch, the machine needle moves side to side as it stitches forward, and you'll mostly see it in raw edges, delicate fabrics, buttonhole, and lingerie. This stitch is used because it helps control fraying and adds also a bit of flexibility compared to the lock stitch. And also, it's not usually the main seam, it's more like a support type of seam or a finish. And if you see it in clothes as the only type of stitch, there is a high chance it was used to cut some cost, which will eventually make that piece of clothing less durable. The chain stitch. This type of stitch is mostly used for woven fabrics as well. It looks straight on the outside, just like a lock stitch, but on the other side it forms a chain of loops. And the technical way of doing it is basically one thread forms loops that interlock. You'll mostly see it in jeans, hems, and also in a lot of long seams in production. It is used because it's fast and slightly flexible. But the issue of this seam is that if one part breaks, the whole seam can start unraveling. That's why hems sometimes suddenly come undone. So if it happened that you had some clothes with some piece of threads just hanging out of your item, and you pulled by it and the stitch started going undone, this means that it was a chain stitch. The overlocking or overedge seam. This stitch is used for both woven and knit fabrics, and it looks like a thread wrapping around the edge of the fabric. In order to obtain this stitch, the machine cuts the edge and stitches around it at the same time. And you'll see it mostly in the inside seams of most cloths and also for seam allowances. This type of stitch is used because it finishes edges and prevents fraying. I was mentioning that it can be used for woven and knit fabrics as well. So in woven fabrics, this is mostly used as a finishing step after a lock stitch was applied in order to put the pieces together. So it only prevents from fraying basically. But on knit fabrics, it often acts as the main seam because it can stretch. There is also the possibility of adding one more thread and have a 4-thread overlock stitch, but also has the possibility to reinforce that connection between the fabrics. The flat felt seam. The flat felt seam is used only for woven fabrics, and it looks like two parallel lines of stitching on the front side and with no raw edges visible. In order to obtain this stitch, the fabric is folded over itself and stitched down, and you'll mostly see it in jeans, shirts, and workwear. The main reason to use this stitch is because it's very strong and durable, which makes the manufacturer choose it for clothes made from very strong and thick fabric. This is basically why some garments feel more solid and last longer, because the seam is actually built to handle the stress. The French seam. The French seam is used for woven fabrics, especially the lightweight ones, like organza or some very thin cottons and silks. In order to identify a French seam, you have to look on the insides. If it's very clean, completely enclosed on the inside, it means it's a French seam. In order to obtain this seam, the fabric, at first, is being sewn on the right side and then turned together and sewn again in order to hide the raw edges inside, which makes it obtain that clean finish of the piece. You'll mostly see it in dresses, blouses, and basically in all sheer fabrics. And this type of seam is also a good quality test to do if you decide to buy something made from sheer fabrics, because if you see an overlocking stitch at the end of a piece made from silk, chiffons, or other type of materials, it means that the production was made as cheap as possible, because those materials are quite sensible and it's best to use a French seam on them to ensure their durability over time. And when you're wearing something made with French seam, they will feel smooth on the inside and will prevent fraying over time, which means they are going to be very strong and be with you for a long time. Another type of stitch is the cover stitch. This type of stitch is used for knit fabrics and it looks like two parallel lines on the outside and loops on the inside. In order to obtain this type of stitch, multiple needles stitch on top with a looping thread underneath. This stitch is used because it stretches and also stays flat, ensuring that those seams are not getting rubbed into your skin. Also, the double line at the hem isn't decoration, it actually allows movement without breaking, and this is why it's perfect for knit fabrics. The Flatlock seam. It's also used for knit fabrics and it looks pretty similar with the Coverlock. The pieces of fabrics connected with a Flatlock seam
are joined edge to edge and stitched while being spread open, creating a flat seam with no bulk, which means it sits smoothly against the skin and doesn't cause friction when you move.
You'll mostly see it in sportswear, activewear, and underwear. Its main purpose is to actually ensure the durability and strength, and also that they don't rub onto your skin. And it's more comfortable, especially when the garment is tight or you're moving a lot, which usually happens in activewear. The thing with the seams is not that some are good and some are bad, it's about whether it is actually appropriate for the fabric and the job it has to do. Because seams don't just hold fabric together, they take on all the stress of your movement, like sitting, stretching, pulling, and also the washing. So here's what actually happens. A seam can be technically strong, but if it doesn't move the way the fabric moves, it will fail. And the opposite is also true. A seam can look simple, even delicate, but if it behaves exactly like the fabric, it can last for years. And this is why one t-shirt twists after a few washes, but another keeps its shape. Or one pair of trousers pull at the seams, but the other feels comfortable all day, and nothing rips at all. The thing is that it's basically the same idea, but a different execution, depending on the fabric, depending on the purpose of that garment, and also depending on the abilities of the manufacturer and how fair it is to you as a consumer, because the seams are sometimes how the brands actually cut costs in order to make the piece of clothing cheaper. So next time you're trying on clothes, don't just look at the fabric. Pay attention also to the seams, how they look, how they feel, how they move, and if they are appropriate for the garment and the fabric that the garment is made of. Because the way a garment was put together is often the real reason you want to wear it, or it can be the reason why it got destroyed. If this video was useful, please give it a like and subscribe for more content like this one. And if you're interested about the process of making cloths, I also share on Instagram the behind the scenes process of me making my cloths, so you're welcome to join me there as well. See you in the next one.